Happy Monday. Happy Monday of Holy Week. This is Father Mark, and welcome back to our podcast series, especially in this most sacred of weeks, a week set apart, consecrated to God, a Holy Week. As promised yesterday, this week we will walk with Jesus, getting to know him more personally in his humanity as we together prepare to receive the gift that he gives the world on Good Friday. And so it's Monday, just a few days before that very Good Friday. Just a few things to consider may have been happening in Jesus and with Jesus on Monday of Holy Week. More than likely, Jesus is in Bethany, staying with Martha and Mary and Lazarus. It's not a far walk from Jerusalem to Bethany, and Bethany is a safe place for Jesus. His friends are there. That's where his apostles can also stay with him, and it's a nice place for him to stay, to be with the Father, to be in silence, to be with people that he trusts and loves. It's not a far walk from their house in Bethany to Jerusalem, so we can imagine that Jesus is making that walk early in the morning and in Jerusalem during the day, making that walk back in the late evening. It's Monday, and so as Jesus is walking from Bethany to Jerusalem, he sees the palms from yesterday's entrance into Jerusalem on the ground. Visible reminders of his triumphant entry into Jerusalem as the Lamb of God. And no doubt, as he's walking, noticing those palms and remembering yesterday, that it is remembering that is a part of these days preceding his passion, death, and eventual resurrection. Jesus is recalling, remembering all of the promises in the Old Testament that referred to him. Jesus is remembering specifically passages in the prophet Isaiah which speak of the suffering servant, which clearly point to Jesus as the suffering servant. Jesus is remembering all the prophecies of the Old Testament, all the things that pointed to Jesus, and the Psalms that spoke of a man who's experiencing all the emotions that Jesus is experiencing. Jesus is remembering all of those passages, prophecies, and Old Testament promises. He's remembering all that the Father has said to him throughout his entire life. And he's remembering all that he himself has foretold would happen because of the Father's fidelity to him. In the quiet, in the long walks, in the recollected interior disposition, Jesus is remembering. How appropriate that is for us today, that we might enter into today with an intentional commitment to remember all that God has done for us this Lent. For those of us who began the journey at Christmas with Choose to Live, I would encourage you to recall, to look back, to remember all that God has done in your life. For those of us who began the podcast pilgrimage on Ash Wednesday under the banner of Intentional, I would encourage you to look back on this Lent and to remember all that God has done in your life. Or if you just kind of stumbled into this podcast and you're joining us maybe even today for the first time, can we together look back on the times in our life where God has been the most faithful? Yesterday, I asked that we carve out time for silence, and I promised that we would tell you what to do in the silence. And the first thing that we do in the silence that we carve out in this holiest of weeks is we remember all the promises that God made to you that he has fulfilled. All the times that you've needed God and he's come through. All that you asked for that may be coming to light now in this season of your life. Let us remember this week the fidelity of God as we anticipate Good Friday and Easter, which is the fulfillment of that fidelity. God bless you.